Okay, it's Reed Gray, also known as ROBO Hippie on the wood turning forums, and this is basically how to set up and use my little tool rest that I've made for grinders. If you've tried using the ones that come with the grinders, they're basically scrap metal, and this is a case of me making something that worked the way I wanted it to. Number one thing, this tool rest will not give you machine shop perfect angles. It will give you repeatable angles every single time. If you set it at 45, you might get 42 or 43, or you might get 47 or 48. The idea is that they will repeat exactly every single time. Another point on this was designed specifically around this older version of the Woodcraft no-name grinder. These tool rests are a one size fits most. One size does not fit all, and you may have to do some minor adjustments with your setup on them to get them to fit perfectly, but they will work. Okay, most of these grinders have been set up to accommodate this one-way Wolverine jig. Nice jig, but it requires the grinder to be set up on a 3/4 inch piece of plywood in order to be able to get the one-way Wolverine jig underneath it. To get your angles the most accurate, you want your tool rests to be at center height of the wheel. And if you look real close here, this one's right on. And again, that is with this grinder set up on a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. Some of the newer grinders are a hair higher, but the closer this is to dead center, the more accurate your angles will be. One safety note here, I do have this wheel shroud pulled away so you can find the center. That does help you get it to proper center height, but never ever run this type of wheel without the wheel shroud around it. These can crack and chip and fall apart, and you may end up having to go to the emergency room and getting blood all over your work, so never run this wheel without this shroud on it. Okay, so this is a tool rest setup for the one-way Wolverine system. Again, set it on the plywood, see where it relates to the center height of your grinder, and the closer to center height it is, the better it's going to work. And notice too that my through pin, if we can see that, notice too that the through pin is set at 90 degrees. Now again, this is for the one-way Wolverine jig. This one is fastened down to the plywood. There are a couple of screw holes on the sides, and this little lever arm does allow you to move the thing in and out. Main thing, you want this centered on the wheel. You can adjust it in and out however you want and then lock it into place with this particular system. That's what these are good for. I use the freestanding version of the tool rest because I don't use gouge jigs, but that's another story. Now if you're using the standard aluminum oxide grinding wheels, they're 1 inch wide, no problem getting plenty of room to the sides. If you're using the CBN wheels, which are my preference, they will fit inside here with 1/8 of an inch or so clearance on each side, but then that makes getting this centered a little bit more critical because you don't want the sides of the wheels rubbing on the bigger opening. Okay, I have found out on some of these grinders, you notice these little through tubes here. That makes sure the pin goes all the way through to the other side and you don't have to hunt for the hole on the other side. But sometimes the flange on some of these grinders will get in the way and actually prevent your tool rest from moving forward. You can trim that off if you want, or just leave it in place. The main problem this causes is if your flange comes up high and it runs into this, that will limit how close you can get this to the wheel. I use the CBN wheels, so they're never going to change dimension. That's not a problem. With your aluminum oxide wheels, that may cause a bit of a problem. The angles will repeat, but they're going to change a little bit as your wheel gets smaller. Okay, for positioning the tool rest on your grinder platform, you want it centered as close to the middle as you can. That helps. And these lines are kind of hard to see on camera, but there's a line that goes all the way through here, and that line, basically you want that to be as close to the face of the wheel as possible. Okay, center height is set. I have the tool rest even with the face of the wheel, and I have it centered. The next thing to do is mark screw holes. I do these by hand. Basically the slots leave you a little bit of room for adjustment. So put a line down. I only use 4 screws. You can use more if you want. Like this. And I'll do that on both sides for both sets of screws. I do like to pre-drill the holes as these screws are rather fat. This is just kind of a standard screw bit. Tapered, it'll do. I do not set these down all the way tight, but I get them kind of snug. You notice that was kind of bouncing around as I was screwing it in. Sometimes having a long bit will help, or the old-fashioned original cordless drill. Okay, now the screws are snug but not tight, and as you see I need to go about 1/16 of an inch towards the wheel. So basically I just tap with a hammer on the bottom a little bit. And that gives me perfect spacing, and now I can tighten the screws down the rest of the way. I do like having the tool rest pretty close to the edge of your plywood here. Main reason is this is the lowest angle it sits, 25 degrees. If this is too far forward, your handle is going to be bumping on this part of the plywood. So another explanation of that is if you're too far in from the edge of the plywood, you try to sharpen, your tool can run into the plywood, so they do work better if they're all the way out on the edge, and that gives you room. This is a grinder that I use every day, the Baldors. They're pretty heavy duty, and if you notice this, it sits fairly high above where the tool rest sits right on the plywood. So what I ended up having to do for this one to get it to fit, the tool rest has to go up on a little platform. This is actually 2 3/4 inch pieces of plywood glued together. Puts this at dead center. This is how I measure to find out how high I have to raise the platform. Okay, so this is a block. I put it right on the corner of the plywood. This is where it will be screwed down in place, and I actually do screw it in from behind before I do my layout for my screw holes. Okay, so this one already has my holes drilled in it since I use this every day, but I wanted to show how you bring the platform up to proper height. This is adjusted in place. Okay. If you look down here, the holes are already drilled, and I will again tighten up the screws, get them down snug, and then tap it into place so it's exactly where I want it, and then tighten them all up. So this shows the underneath. Basically these are the 4 screw holes that will hold my riser block in place. The screws are recessed, so this is not scratching the bottom of whatever work table you have it on. These are the bolts that hold the grinder in place, and again these are recessed so they're not rubbing on your workbench. And if your screw holes are not perfectly centered, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference because there is a little bit of play here which will usually cover most of that. Some bend in it, but yeah, the closer it makes them easier. So setting the pin through at 90 degrees, that gives me my reference line here. Tap a little bit, get it perfect, and then tighten it down. So setting the pin through, this is 9 for 90 degrees. That's how I like to have everything set for when I'm setting up the tool rest, and then after it's in place I never move it. Corresponding numbers here, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3. That's 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30 degrees. The ones on top are the 5-degree increments in between. I found out if I put the numbers in there that like 95 or 85 or whatever degrees, the numbers are too small for me to read. This allows me to put the numbers in a little bit bigger, and I figure it's not too hard to figure out that these are the 5s and these are the evens. And in case you're wondering what this hole is for, that's if you feel like putting an idiot string on your key, you know, like the string your mom used to run through your jacket so you'd come home with both mittens at the end of the day. I have never had problems with the keys vibrating loose or coming out, but there is a chance that they can fall down in the sawdust and get lost.